Hello guys, it's the Caribbean Bookworm, and today I'll be giving you a book review for The Stand, written by Stephen King. The Stand is a post-apocalyptic and dark fantasy novel written by Stephen King. It's basically about a pandemic that starts throughout the US and slowly but surely spreads throughout the world. Now, this pandemic is caused by a virus that basically wipes out about 99% of humanity, and the few people that are immune starts to have these weird visions. And these visions are divided, or these dreams are divided into two types of dreams. A dream of a really benevolent, prophet like old woman, Mother Abagail, or they dream about this rather more malevolent force of nature known as Randall Flagg. And basically, these survivors who are immune to the virus have to decide eventually whether or not they're gonna go to in the direction of this prophetic woman or of this dark man. The Stand laid some of the groundwork for some of the most popular post-apocalyptic type of stories. So think of The Walking Dead, some movies out there like Book of Eli. So in general, if you're a fan of this genre, it's quite an important read, I'd say. But there are many other reasons related to the book specifically of which I really like the book, and some reasons of which I didn't like the book. But all in all, I'd say, despite this being, I think, literally Stephen King's biggest work, so The Stand, the uncut edition, I liked it a tad bit more than it. It, of course, is a great book. Like it has great character development and all of that. But there is something more epic and something of which I liked a little bit more here than I liked about it. But we'll jump into the pros and cons and then get to that. So my first pro with the book is basically the character development. This is what makes The Stand as well known and epic as it is. There are a lot of characters in the stories, and you don't just stay to one character. Like you follow these different characters throughout their journey as they try to navigate this post-pandemic world. The thing that this book highlights is basically what it means to have personalities and what it means to have characters. You can have personalities or just people that do not have their own character, like they don't have character development, you don't know what their motivations are, etc. But in this book, each one of the characters that King decided to flesh out, you actually know where they're coming from. Like I thought some of the most interesting like protagonists of the book were Stu Redman, the ex-military guy, Larry Underwood, the musician, and Nick Andros, the deaf mute. The really well-established character development alone, in my opinion, justifies for a bit of the really fleshed out parts of the book. My second pro with the book is, of course, the outbreak of the virus itself. Having read this book throughout these weird times makes this book even more scary, especially towards the beginning, seeing how close to reality the news and the steps that are being taken place actually it all actually plays out. And even worse, it shows you what a pandemic can be like if the virus was even more deadly. And even gets you thinking about whether or not some people would actually use such means as like a form of like weaponized bioweapon of mass destruction. It's a scary thought. How they showed how this virus basically gets to everyone at some point, that was a scary thing to see, like especially from the viewpoint of just the civilians in general, because there's a part of the book in which they elaborate not just on our main characters but just on the world in general and how it's reacting towards this pandemic. And it's a really frightening thing, but I found it really fascinating as well, like fascinating in the darkest of sense. My third pro with the book is the dark fantasy slash biblical tone. This book, as I've mentioned in a previous video, but I will of course mention it here, has a lot of similarities to the final book of the canonical Bible of Catholicism or Christianity, and that is the book of Revelation. There are a lot of overlapping tones in which you have like the horsemen of the apocalypse, like the warnings coming towards that there's an end coming. You have an evil supernatural presence that is behind all of the evil that is going on within the society. In this case of the book is the dark man. And overall you have a sense of prophecy in which I found just quite riveting. And towards the end of the book there's something that happens, like when this all basically wraps up, that just the way it's written and described is just really cool. Last pro with the book is of course the antagonist what is a good story without a good antagonist, especially in this case where you're talking about like this dark supernatural presence that is like lurking throughout this pandemic world. And in this case, of course, is one of Stephen King's most popular villains, Randall Flagg. Randall Flagg is well known throughout a lot of other Stephen King works, such as the Dark Tower series, The Eyes of the Dragons, and even some short stories. And in here, I found it to be quite engaging. He's this really charismatic guy, which you can see how basically he's able to convince millions of people to go behind him and follow his every step of the way, as he basically should be. Like, he's a master manipulator and this force of nature to not to be messed with. And I think I just found that fascinating. Like, if I were to divide this book into three parts, it would be the beginning, the pandemic. In the middle, it will be the protagonist trying to figure things out, trying to find their way towards where they need to go and going there. So they're having more of these dreams. So they're seeing either Mother Abagail or Randall Flagg. And towards the end, it's where everything starts to like pile up and conclude. I'd say the middle part, although having its really slow bits, which I will talk about in the con, that the part where they were exploring the dreams and such, I found that to be like really fat, really interesting, as that realistically portrays how people would react in such a situation in which you're in this post-pandemic world. You don't know what exactly to think, but you're having these weird dreams and everybody else seems to be having these weird dreams. So it's not like people would instantly accept the fact that something's happening there, but just the fact that more people are trying to have these dreams, it seems a bit more than coincidental. So they slowly and gradually start to take these things seriously. So hence why I thought the dark fantasy elements with Randall Flagg and the other person as well were quite realistic, and I didn't have quite that much problem with it as in comparison to some other booktubers of which I saw. This book does have its con, and firstly I wanted to mention that at times it dragged. It dragged a lot, especially I found when I wanted to see things get going for the third and last part of the book, it took long to get the wheel turning. So maybe things could have been cut a bit less there, a bit less on the like actually thinking and discussing and more on doing, like show don't tell in a way. My second con with the book were Harold Lauder and Franny Goldsmith. I thought both characters they had their moments of which they were interesting, especially in the beginning, like when the pandemic was at its start and such. I found Harold and Franny to be interesting, especially Franny with her backstory with Jess and her parents. But after that, she didn't, especially Franny, she didn't quite work for me. Franny was, she went from this quite strong and independent thinker to this person who was very much erratic, very much emotional, although it's understandable considering the factor that's happening with her throughout the story, but I still found it a bit like just a little bit too much. And Harold, he's interesting, but we just in the book at least you didn't get a lot of him. Like he wasn't as flashed out as I'd wanted him to be. And my third and last con with this book was in the middle, which ironically happened to be one of my favorite parts of the book. It was also again rather slow. So even though the middle of the book was good, again there were some parts that were really dragging, which you were like, oh, I just want to get to the next thing already, and it took its time, and it's like, oh damn. So yeah, my cons with the book reside mainly with some of the pacing moments in the book and as well some of the character decisions. But overall, that didn't bother too much. That didn't disturb me too much with the reading experiences. I still enjoyed it quite a lot. So, The Stand, overall, would I recommend it? Absolutely. Now, if you want to get into Stephen King and you want to give one of his books a shot and you just watching my channel, like this is one of the first videos you've seen of my channel, then I'd say for sure do not start with The Stand. The Stand is really big and it takes a lot of motivation sometimes to get through it. So it wouldn't be the best first King read. Like for that, I'd say read something a bit more condensed, a bit more short, depending on your taste. So you either read some short story collections, or I'd say my number one go-to for people who have never read Stephen King, in my opinion, would be The Eyes of the Dragon. The Eyes of the Dragon was like quite fitting if you never read King before. But overall, I do recommend this, especially if you're able to read a lot. Like this is a lot of pages. Like it's a big read. Like it's one of those big reads that people sometimes brag about, such as reading Lord of the Rings or It by Stephen King himself and other works of the likes. So if you can handle long reads, if you can stomach some gore, because the book is like the horror parts ain't that bad, but there's a lot of like gory things that are happening as you would expect in a pandemic world. So if you can stomach all of those things, then go for the stand. I think you'd like it. So I'm curious to hear what you guys thought about The Stand. If you read the book, comment down below. And if you want to read it or have some questions or just curious about certain things, let me know. And I also want to know if you read a lot of Stephen King books, if you like Randall Flagg as much as I do. I really like that character. But yeah, overall, that was my book review for The Stand, and I hope to see you guys soon. Bye.